Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. I spy a new friend.
Hello everybody, it's Mooney here and welcome to my Nahida guide. Genshin's 3.2 update just dropped along with our adorable Dendro Archon Nahida, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about her talents, playstyles, plus artifact sets, weapons, and team comps, so let's dive in. So how exactly does Nahida work? Nahida is an elemental mastery scaling sub-DPS/support who works as both an on or off-field unit. Let's start with her normal attack, Akara. Nahida unleashes up to 4 adorable and mid-ranged normal attacks dealing dendro damage, scaling off her attack. Her charged attack is this screen that snaps like a camera, damaging enemies around a particular area. Next, we're going to be talking about the bread and butter of Nahida's kit, which is her skill, all schemes to know. This skill has 2 variations, which is a tap and a hold. Tapping her skill makes Nahida do a spin slash, dealing dendro damage and marking the enemies that come into contact with it. Do keep in mind that Nahida's skill damage, be it the hold or tap variation, is based on her attack. Meanwhile, holding her skill puts you in this aiming mode, which increases your resistance to interruption, and, same as the tap variation, allows you to deal dendro damage and mark a maximum of 8 opponents. Now let's talk about her skill's mark, which is called the Seed of Skanda. Opponents who have been marked by the Seed of Skanda will be linked to one another up till a certain distance, lasting up to 25 seconds. Once you trigger an elemental reaction on these opponents, or when they take damage from dendro cores, Nahida will unleash a Tri-Karma Purification effect on the opponents and all linked opponents, dealing dendro damage based on her attack and elemental mastery. Tri-Karma Purification has a trigger interval of 2.5 seconds and can be slightly lessened by her burst. Speaking of her burst, Illusory Heart, this burst summons the huge Shrine of Maya, having a base duration of 15 seconds and 50 energy cost. Even while not dealing any damage, her burst gives you buffs based on whether you team her up with an Electro, Pyro, or Hydro unit. This buff caps to a maximum of 2 characters with the same element. The Pyro buff increases the damage dealt by Tri-Karma Purification. The Electro buff reduces the trigger interval between each Tri-Karma Purification effect. And lastly, the Hydro buff increases her burst duration. Now let's take a look at her passives. Her A1 passive, Compassion Illuminated. Unleashing her burst increases the elemental mastery of the active character within the burst field by 25% of the party member with the highest elemental mastery, capping at a maximum of 250 EM. Next is her A4 passive, Awakening Elucidated, which is her strongest passive. Each point of Nahida's elemental mastery beyond 200 will grant a 0.1% bonus damage and 0.03% crit rate to the Tri-Karma Purification effect from her skill. This passive grants her a maximum of 80% bonus damage and 24% crit rate, which is absolutely insane. Unlocking this passive also encourages you to build your Nahida to have at least 1000 elemental mastery. Her talent priorities would be to level her skill and burst, and her normal attacks can either be unleveled to save resources or prioritized last. Moving on, we're now going to be talking about Nahida's playstyle. Nahida can be played as an on or off-field unit. For an off-field playstyle, you just have to use her skill and burst, then swap to your other characters. She can also be played as an on-field dendro applier, taking advantage of her attack combos. Nahida's a very simple character to use with a lot of complex descriptions to her talents. Since her skills tap and hold only have a 1 second difference from each other, I highly recommend holding her skill majority of the time. It's also important to stay within the burst field for Nahida and her team to get the full buffs of her burst. With all that being said, we're now going to be talking about how to build Nahida efficiently, starting off with her artifact sets. Warpy's Gilded Dreams is currently one of her best sets, giving Nahida 80 elemental mastery on the 2-piece, and giving her another 50 EM or 14% attack depending on whether or not her team is the same element as her. Since you'll most likely be running Nahida in a reaction team, you'll typically be getting 230 Elemental Mastery, or 180 with 14% attack, should you choose to run another Dendro character alongside her. Now what's so good about running her on 4-piece Gilded is not only does it let you stack more EM, but also allows you to use a 4-piece Deepwood set on one of your teammates, buffing Nahida's Dendro damage even further. The next 4-piece set I'm going to be talking about is the 4-piece Deepwood Memories itself, shredding the Dendro res of enemies by 30% every time you use your skill or burst. This effect also triggers even when Nahida is not on the field, making it a very solid option for her. Another alternative would be 2-piece Deepwood for the Dendro damage bonus and a 2-piece Gilded Dreams or Wanderers. 2-piece Gilded and 2-piece Wanderers would work just fine as well. For a slightly more niche set, if you want to build your Nahida entirely as a support, you can also use a 4-piece Noblesse. For players who haven't reached AR 45 yet, I recommend using the 4-piece Instructor set on her as it increases her and her team's Elemental Mastery by 120, aside from her A1 passive already giving the active character an extra 200 EM during her burst. Now that we're done discussing her artifacts, what stats should you build on her? If you're building Nahida for her reaction damage, Elemental Mastery will be your best bet for all your artifacts. Aim for a minimum of 800 EM up to a total of 1000 for her A4 passive. For substats, the priority would still be Elemental Mastery, then crit rate and damage, energy recharge, and lastly attack. Now if you want to build your Nahida as a main DPS, her stat priorities become a little different. For her main stats, you'd want to focus on an attack percent or EM Sands, a Dendro damage bonus goblet, and a crit rate or damage circlet, depending on which can get you that 1:2 ratio. For substats, her priorities would be crit rate or damage, Elemental Mastery, attack, and energy recharge. Next up, we're going to be talking about Nahida's best weapons at Constellation 0. The great thing about Nahida is that she's very free-to-play friendly when it comes to weapons, having a huge arsenal of weapons that can be suited for her depending on your playstyle. For 5-star weapons, her best in slot is definitely her signature weapon, 1000 Floating Dreams. Aside from having a ton of EM, equipping this weapon will give her buffs on whether or not her team's element is the same as her. If the elements are the same at R1, it increases her EM further by 32 and a maximum of 96 with 3 stacks. If not, increases Nahida's elemental damage bonus by 10% up to a maximum of 30%. Not only that, your team will also have their elemental mastery increased by 40, and effects from weapons similar to this can stack. Her second best 5-star weapon would be Kagura's Verity, due to it synergizing amazingly on her and buffing her elemental skill damage by 12% for 16 seconds per skill. Although getting the 3 stacks would take a bit, the 48% total elemental damage bonus when you've gained all stacks, along with the crit damage substat from this weapon, is enough for it to be deemed her second best weapon, and can sometimes even outperform her signature one in terms of damage. Third would be Lost Prayer, giving a decent amount of crit rate and 32% elemental damage bonus at 4 stacks. It's a solid option for her due to the crit rate stat, which means more crit rate for her skill along with her A4 passive already giving 24%. However, the downside to running this weapon is that you lose the elemental damage bonus when you swap her out, but if you're using on-field Nahida, this is a very good weapon. Last among the 5-star weapons is the Skyward Atlas. If you're planning to use Nahida as an on-field Dendro DPS and level up her normal attacks, this is a more niche option, giving her an unconditional 12% elemental damage bonus. However, even 4-star weapons can outmatch Skyward Atlas in terms of efficiency. For 4-star weapons, her best 4-star as an on-field character is the free-to-play craftable weapon Mappa Mare, which at R1, upon triggering a reaction, increases her elemental damage bonus by 8% to a maximum of 16% for 10 seconds. This weapon is great for Nahida. Due to her being the one to proc the Dendro reactions, it's very easy to have 100% uptime on its passive and dealing a lot of damage. Do note that this weapon falls off quite a bit in terms of damage if you're not playing on-field Nahida, but it can still work on her. Next up is the Sacrificial Fragments, which can be better with higher refinements. This weapon doesn't sound good on paper due to Nahida having a short skill cooldown, but since Nahida's skill does deal damage upon cast, Having it reset gives her another instance to proc another dendro reaction due to her skill not having an internal cooldown, which you can take advantage of in certain teams. Because of this reason, Sacrificial Fragments is a top-notch weapon for her. We also have the new Gacha Catalyst from the second half of 3.1's weapon banner, the Wandering Evenstar. If you pull down the weapon banner and got a copy of this weapon, it is also a solid option for Nahida, which at R1 gives her bonus attack based on 24% of her elemental mastery, and giving her team 30% of this buff for 12 seconds. It is an okay weapon for her, but certainly gets better with high refinements. Our next 4-star option is the Widsith, being better at high refinements, though somewhat inconsistent. Widsith gives Nahida a solid crit damage boost and increases either her attack, elemental damage bonus, or elemental mastery for 10 seconds when she takes the field. If you happen to hit the elemental mastery buff of this weapon, it can prove to be very good on her. Overall, an okay weapon. If you hit the EM buff, that's great. It gets better with high refinement, but it's a very situational weapon with a short uptime and long downtime. Then we have the Battle Pass Catalyst, Solar Pearl, which gives her a decent amount of crit rate, but requires you to weave in a couple of normal attacks before using her skill and burst to increase their damage by 20%. One thing to note, her burst doesn't really deal damage, so you'll only be using this weapon for her skill. This is similar to Skyward Atlas in terms of being niche for her, but due to its crit rate stat, it can be very good for an on-field Nahida, and possibly better than the Skyward Atlas. For lower AR players, or for players on a budget, Magic Guide is also an amazing pick for her if you're using her with a Hydro or Electro character. If you're using Nahida off-field, you can simply use her skill and swap and she'll be able to maintain 100% uptime on the passive. Magic Guide surprisingly has more elemental mastery than Mappa Mare, and because of that, this is one of her best free-to-play weapons, which you can have an easier time R5ing than Mappa Mare if you've been saving up your 3-star weapon copies. Now that we know how to build Nahida, we're now going to be taking a look at her team comps. Since Nahida is an AMP scaling dendro sub-DPS and support, Nahida flourishes the best in a reaction team, whether she's in a quick swap team or plays the part of an on-field dendro applier. The first team I'll be mentioning is a quicken team. This team can have multiple varieties depending on which suits you the most. This team can also be a mono-electro team with Nahida. If you're more comfortable with a shield, you can slot Zhongli with Nahida. This team is basically composed of Nahida, one or more electro units, Zhongli, or an animal unit like Sucrose or Kazuha for the VV Shred. Now, since she's the 4th Archon to be released, she finally completes the Archon team, which consists of Nahida, Zhongli, Raiden, and Venti. With this team, you can use either Raiden or Nahida as the one-to-proc reactions, although this team works the best against multiple enemies due to Venti's crowd controlling capabilities. The next team is Nilou's Bloom team, where Nahida is now one of the dendro units most likely replacing Kale. With Nahida most likely having the most elemental mastery in this team, she can work as the on-field dendro applier or DPS for Nilou's bountiful course. The rest of this team remains the same, needing a healer which would be either Barbara or Kokomi, and another dendro unit, which would be DMC instead of Kale for the better and larger AoE burst. Next up we have Nahida's Hyperbloom team, which is also very solid. You can either have Nahida as the on or off-field Hyperbloom proc as well. For an on-field Hyperbloom team, we've got Nahida, a Hydro support, potentially Xingqiu or Yelan, and an Electro support like Beidou or Raiden, and either Zhongli, a VV Shredder like Kazuha and Sucrose, or another dendro unit like DMC. For an off-field Hyperbloom, the template would be similar with Nahida and DMC, an on-field Hydro unit like Ayato, and an Electro unit like Cookie, Beidou, or Raiden. And last but definitely not the least, we have the Burgeon team, with Nahida, 2 Hydro units like Kokomi and Xingqiu or Ayato with Toma. Overall, Nahida is a very fun and fresh character, providing more value to dendro and its reactions. She's also very versatile and relatively easy to build and fit into any dendro team. Is she a strong unit? She very much is. Is she completely broken? No, but she certainly adds a lot more to the plate when it comes to our current dendro units. Should you pull on her? That depends entirely whether you enjoy her character and playstyle. However, I'm sure Nahida will provide your account with a lot of value, and it'll make you grow on her. That's all for this guide video, and may all Nahida wanters be Nahida havers. This is Mooney signing out, and I'll see you all in the next video.
All you have to do is stay a minute. Just take your time, the clock